if Brittany's there. Brittany, can I get a check-in with you just on the Twitch stream? Hello, okay. I think we are good to go. So, just a little bit of a heads up if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. I can't see the comments right away because I have pretty limited screen real estate. So my moderator will be relaying any questions that you have. And I also know there's a bit of a delay between when I'm streaming and like when Facebook is actually going to show it. So it might take a little bit of time for me to get to your question if you do have one. But please feel free to send questions. I don't mind stopping to answer. I will let you know though, this is HydreCAD. I did originally intend this to be like a step-by-step tutorial, but because of time constraints and because drawing takes a little bit of time, I will have to go a little bit fast at some points, just to make sure that we can kind of get this wrapped up and maybe have time for questions. So I'm going to jump right in. We're going to start with this Rysa image. And if you are using Procreate, and if you've never used it before, we're just going to start with a standard default canvas. So in the top right corner here, there's a plus sign. Click that, and the very first thing in the list should just be screen size. So you click on that, and it's going to bring up this white canvas. So I provided some images for you to download if you wanted to follow along, and we're going to start by importing the sketches. And this is really useful for if you like to sketch on real paper and then bring it into digital software after. So to do that in Procreate, in the top left corner you see gallery and there's a wrench icon. You click on that, the first category is add, and then underneath you'll see insert a file and there's also insert a photo. So if you save the images to your photo roll on the iPad, you would click on insert a photo, but if you save them to your files folder, you would use insert a file. So that's where I have them saved, so I'm going to go in there. And then you just select the one you want. So we're starting with the Rysa sketch. Now, before you touch anything, you will notice there's these dotted lines around the image. So if your screen size is different from mine, you can reposition it. And even if your screen size is the same, you can still reposition it if you want. Using a finger, you can click, just hold down to drag it where you want it. This green dot at the top is so you can rotate it. And then the corners will resize the image. So you can position it how you like. There's other options at the bottom, but we don't really need those right now. And when you have it where you want it to be, you can just click the this little cursor icon that was highlighted, just click that to exit it. Now, to make color selection easier, I also included color swatches for you to use. So we're going to import those as well. Clicking the wrench icon again, insert a file or photo, and just insert this palette's image. And we're just going to drag this off to the corner. Click that cursor again. Now, before we get into actually drawing, I'm going to go over layers briefly. In the top right, you see these like two overlapping squares. If you click on it, that's going to bring up your layers. So you can see our palettes are on one, our sketches on another, and then you have a solid background. The little check boxes on the right side, they will actually hide or show your layers. So we'll be doing this a bit, like hiding our sketch layer and stuff like that. If you want to make a new layer, which we have to do at this point, you just click this plus button in the top corner and it'll bring a new one in. We're going to, the way I like to arrange my sketches for when I'm doing line with style artwork like this is I like to take layer 1 and drag it to the top. We'll actually leave our palettes at the very top. So if we click on layer 3 and let's say you try to draw something underneath it, you're not going to be able to see it right away because the image is actually white. So the way you can get around this is if you press, there's the letter N, if you click on that, you'll see a drop down and you want to scroll right to the top and you're going to get multiply. So multiply is a very useful layer style to use. It basically drops all the white out. So if you have a sketch or a liner that you drew yourself, or if you found one online that you want to use, but there's white all around it, you can use multiply to drop that white out. Okay. So now we're actually ready to draw. I'm going to use all default brushes that are built into Procreate for this. I'm using a stylus, but you can also use your finger. Most of them actually work pretty well with just a finger instead of a stylus. So for these, I like to use, if you click on your brush icon, you'll see a huge list of brushes. There are like hundreds of brushes in Procreate. But one of my favorites is under inking, there's the Studio pen. And it's a nice smooth brush. It'll give you like just really nice smooth lines, and it's a pretty standard brush. But now, if you've never used Procreate before, or if you don't know about this, when you start to draw the line, it might look wobbly, and I'll show you what, if you've never messed with the settings, I'll show you what it'll kind of look like. Like, you'll see all the wobbles in it as you're trying to draw a line. So the best tip I can give you for drawing digitally is when you're in your brushes, you can actually click on the brush itself and you'll see a bunch of settings. The most important setting to change is this second one called Streamline. You're just going to want to drag it all the way up to max, and this is going to automatically smooth the lines for you. So even if you have a really wobbly hand, it'll still come out really smooth. So just make sure that when you're using these pens, you have that done first. So we're going to start off filling in the body for this image. I always start with kind of filling in the largest shape, and then I'll work the details on top after. So we're going to use color picking here. So on the left side of the screen, there's this little square icon in between these sliders. So these sliders are so you can change your brush size. The top one is for brush size, and the bottom one is for opacity. You don't need to mess with the bottom one yet. Just the top one, change it to a setting that you feel comfortable with. The middle button here, if you click on it, you're going to see this like weird wheel thing pop up. You can actually tap and hold over your colors so that you can quickly select a color. We're going to be doing this a lot. Thank you for the compliment on the music. So Raichu's main body is that deep orange, so select that. And we're going to start drawing. You might want to change the opacity of the sketch before you start filling it in. So to do that, if you click on the letter M that's next to it now, this first slider is for your opacity. This is kind of personal preference. So I like to keep it pretty low, but if you find it hard to see, you can turn it up higher. So I'm gonna try and keep it to where you guys can still see it on the screen. Should be good. Now, make sure you're drawing on the right layer. So click on layer, it's probably gonna be layer 3. And we're gonna start drawing. Where's a good place to start? We'll start with the ear. We're actually going to just go all around the outside shape. And the cool thing about Procreate that's built in, if you press down with your pen, drag, you don't even need to drag like close to the line, and just hold at the end of the line, you'll see that it automatically snapped to an arc. And you'll see at the top, this like top line up here, it'll say arc created, and you can edit the shape afterwards. So make sure you don't click anything because it'll go away. But if you click edit shape now, you'll get blue points, and you can actually drag this line around to change it. So if you didn't get it right on the first go, you can just edit that arc and just drag it to wherever you want it to be. And we're going to use this a lot for doing these images. It really helps to speed things up so that you don't have to undo a bunch. If you do need to undo, you have 2 little buttons underneath the sliders on the left. And if you have Procreate set just to the default, you can use 2 fingers to tap on the screen to undo. And that's the whole preamble. There's a lot of preamble, but if you've never really used this software before, it's good to know these things going into it before you start drawing. So now we're just going to start creating arcs to create the liner. So you start, hold your pen or your finger, edit your shape, and just drag it to wherever you, until you get the line that you like. And then tap outside of it to end the edit. And this is really good for if you're not used to drawing, especially like on a digital screen, because it's very slippery. So I hear that from a lot of people. They have a hard time drawing on iPads or Cintiqs, Surfaces, stuff like that. So this is really good if you're new to it and you're a little shaky. Don't worry about tracing all these inner lines. We don't need them right away. So just go around the outer edges, and you can even start like off of the line a little bit. So just edit your shapes as you go. I'm gonna speed up a little bit more now. I'm pretty used to doing this, so I don't need to edit all my lines, but take your time with it to get a good outside shape. There are some shapes that you can't do with quick shapes, so like these spirals, you're just gonna have to fill it in with your hand. But if you have your smoothing turned all the way up, it should be fine. And you'll see that I'm rotating my screen a lot. I'm just rotating, you use 2 fingers to pinch. It's the zoom and like stuff like that. It works the same on like most other iPad software. So we're just gonna take our time going around all the edges. And you'll see why I'm not filling in any shapes solidly yet, because when we have the outside edge done, I'm going to show you how to do fills. And flood fills are something that not a lot of people know how to do in Procreate, because it's kind of a hidden tool. Lots of things in Procreate were kind of hidden with like touch gestures and stuff like that. I actually didn't know there was a flood tool in Procreate until maybe 2 years after I had been using the software. And I actually found it completely on accident, so... Oop, okay, so here's a good example of where something could go wrong. So you try and make an arc where you hold, and it automatically snaps to a line instead. Just undo it, and usually what it is you have like a hook on one end. So like here, I actually had a bit of a hook there before I came over here, and for some reason that tries to make it a straight line instead of an arc. So you can continue to just freehand or make the arcs. We're not going to do the tail right yet. Because we're actually going to put the tail on a separate layer. By the way, if you guys do use these sketches to try and create an image, you're free to post them. I would like to see the results if you do follow the tutorial. Just you can use them for any personal use, just don't sell anything with them. But like I said, I would love to see them if you do follow along with the tutorial. Sometimes if it creates a straight line, you can actually press the edit line that comes up at the top, and it'll actually give you an option for a line or an arc. It doesn't always do that. It's kind of random, unfortunately. And I do recommend you always rotate to make your lines. Your hand naturally moves in this kind of arc, or if you're left-handed, it would be this way. So you're going to be able to just get your smooth lines faster if you can rotate your screen to arc the way your arm would naturally move. That goes with traditional art too. You should always try to rotate your artwork to get smoother lines. Don't worry about any of the inner face stuff yet. We're gonna do that later. And this ear. Something kind of interesting that I noticed, last night I was doing a bit of a test for this, and for making lines I actually found sometimes it was easier to just use my finger to draw it, because your finger has more friction with the screen, so you're not gonna like wobble around as much. A little bit to make it thicker. Okay, so that's the body filled. Or lined. Okay, now we're gonna fill it. Yeah, you can. So, Procreate actually has a couple different settings for, called palm support, so that you can, let me show you. So you can have like the whole side of your hand resting on it up until a certain point. So like, you can use, it'll register your fingers. Sometimes if you like touch a knuckle to it, it might accept that as like a finger touch. But it's pretty reliable for not like acting really weird if you have your hand on the side of the screen. And it does have sensitivity issues that you can change if you need to. Most art software actually has that built in now. Okay, we're gonna fill in the Raichu. So, you see in the top right-hand corner, there's your color, just the little yellow dot. If you tap and hold, and then drag that out, it'll fill the picture for you. And that's how we're gonna fill in all of our shapes. So, just to show you again, I'll do it again. Tap and hold, drag it out, oops. Do that again. Tap, hold, and drag it out, and then release, and it'll fill it. Sometimes you might get white, jagged lines when you fill, and I'll try to show you, because this is a pretty common issue. If you tap it, and let's say, like here you'll see, for some reason there's just these like white pixels showing. There's actually settings that you can change, so when you drag the color out, keep holding your finger and slide it to the left or right until it just fills in all of those edges. And we're gonna do that with the ear here, and that's the body. We're gonna create a new layer, so in your layer icons, tap the plus sign. We're gonna tap and drag it down underneath the body. And I'm just gonna use, you can use any color initially to fill this. And we're just gonna create more lines for the tail here. Mostly by using the arcs again, because some of them are pretty long. I'm just gonna fill that tip in after. So over here, I'm going to hide the body layer by clicking that checkmark box so that I can see what I'm doing here. You want to make sure that all of your lines are connected. I'll show you what happens if you don't. So like, let's say if you didn't hide the body and you just drew a line here and then made this one here and you tried to fill it, it's going to flood the whole layer with the color. So you have to make sure that all of your lines are connected. Otherwise the fill won't work. So we're just going to quickly connect those lines. And now we're going to do the line for the tail. Edit the shape. Get it to where you want it. You don't have to have it super exact to the sketch lines that I have either. You can kind of put them wherever, as long as it's close. So I'm going to zoom out. So you can see here it created an ellipse because it thinks we were trying to draw a part of an ellipse. And that's actually fine for the tail, because it kind of is a bit of an elliptical shape. So try and match it up. It went a little bit over, but that's okay. We're just going to use our brush and bring out the rest of the tail here. And make sure it's connected up here. It can be connected however. It can be messy, it's fine. And we're going to fill in these shapes. A little bit right there, just fill it in with your brush if you have any little spots left over. Hi, David. Now we're gonna bring our body layer back. You can actually rename these layers if you want, but we're not going to be using too many layers, so we don't really need to for right now. Okay, now we're going to start filling in the details. We're going to create a new layer above the body with the plus sign, and we're going to use what's called a clipping mask. So I use clipping masks all the time. I'll try and show Brittany, moderator, please take care of that comment. So it's easier for me to just show what a clipping mask does than try to explain it. So if you click on the layer, you'll see this menu that pops up, and the fifth one up from the bottom is clipping mask. Just click that so that there's a check mark, and you'll see a little like arrow next to the icon. And now if I just select any random color and try to draw, it's only going to draw within the orange area, within the orange body area. So this is really useful for like quickly editing, making sure that all of your colors are separate, or all of your design elements are separate, so that you can edit them more easily later on. So we need to try and think about what elements of Raichu's design are kind of on the bottom. So for Raichu, I think it's the brown, like all of the brown spots. So we're going to use this square in between the sliders on the left to color select the brown. You can start anywhere. I'm going to start with the foot. Double check, make sure you're on the right layer. Always double check your layers. And we're going to do a similar thing where we're just going to kind of create some arcs. Edit the shape if you need to. Where you kind of want it to be. And we're going to just take our brush and go around the outer edge of the yellow. And you don't need to worry about going over it because we have that clipping mask set. And we're going to tap, hold, and drag the color to fill it. Now on this foot, if you look at the markings here, it kind of comes in, so you'll want to make sure that you hold at the end of the line so that you can edit your shape and make sure it's not like over or on top of the leg. Set that, and this is actually going to be covered up after, so we can just do the rest of the lines a little messy. Tap, hold, and drag to fill the color. And now we're going to do these spikes. Just trace them. Drag that color dot out. Now we'll do the hands. So here the face comes in. We're just going to carefully trace right there. Create an arc. Edit it to wherever you want it to be. I know on Raichu's official artwork it's actually like a little wavy, but I thought I would just simplify this a little bit. You can make it wavy if you want to though. Drag that color dot out again. Oh, and you see here I actually went over the face a little bit. You can select your eraser. And I like to use the same eraser that I'm using for my drawing just to keep my lines consistent. So it's going to come into a different category for you probably, but go into your inking and select your studio pen. You might need to adjust the size as well, using the slider on the left. And just clean up any area that you might have went over. We're going to do the same thing with this other paw. Create an arc. Trace around the outside. Just make sure that all the brown is connected. And drag the color out. Now we have the ears. Same process. We're going to use an arc. Create an arc here. And a second one here. Edit it just to kind of make sure it looks good. We'll need to just hand brush in this little spiral on his ear. And then we trace around the outside. We're going to create an arc between these points. So just hold your pen at the end of the brush stroke and then adjust it as needed. Make sure all the outside is connecting, and then drag your color out onto it. Ooh, I missed a little spot here, so I'm just going to brush that in. The ear on the kind of on the back of his head here, we're just going to do all of this brown because the inside of his ear wouldn't really be showing. So you can just really quickly trace around the outer side of his ear. Make sure you get that spiral filled in. And connect lines there. And flood fill it. Now we're done with the brown markings. We're going to create a new layer now, just above it. And we're going to make this a clipping mask. All of the layers that we're going to create for the markings, they're all going to be done on clipping masks. I'm going to do this belly now, so I'm going to use the color picker to select this kind of white dot that I got in the yellow. Whenever I'm doing digital art, I like to make sure that my whites aren't pure white and the blacks aren't pure black. So if you click on your color dot to bring up the color selector, you'll actually see I have it usually offset a little bit. And that just helps to make it like look a little more pleasing to the eye. So double check, make sure we're on the right layer. And we're gonna use the same like quick line tool to make a circle. So you can be really messy with your circle and it should interpret it. So when it snaps that circle, hit edit shape and just use these blue dots to adjust it to where you need it. And we're gonna fill it. Now, you can create additional layers if you want to, but for this I'm trying to keep the amount of layers small, just because on some models of iPad you can't have too many layers depending on the size of your canvas. So I'm going to try and keep the amount of layers low just in case somebody's following and they can't have a ton of layers. The other thing that we can do on this same layer is the foot pad here. So not this circle, but this other outline that I have. So we're just going to use the same method, create an arc, or in this case I guess it's an ellipse. Adjust it to where you want it to be, tap outside of it, and I don't really like how this looks, so I'm gonna undo it using the buttons on the left. And I'm just gonna retry it. That's better. And then just make sure you go around the rest of the outer edge. You can do it really quickly and fill it. We can also do his little cheek pads. So using the color selector, I'm going to choose this lighter yellow, and we're going to create another circle. And like I said, you don't have to try and draw a perfect circle. Procreate will recognize most things, so just use the blue dots to adjust it where you want it to be. And I'm just going to do the other one here. Make sure you get that outer edge connected, and we're going to drag, drop, and fill it. So there's also a lighter yellow on the inner ears. We're going to go back to the body layer here, and we're going to create a new layer, and you'll see that it automatically creates a clipping mask because it's in between another clipping mask and the base layer. The fill is really slick. I love the fill tool in Procreate. It's so much faster than a lot of other like programs, like just the fact that it's not like a separate tooltip thing, you know? It kind of sucked at first because I didn't think there was one. For like 2 years, and then I found out it did exist and it blew my mind. Okay. We're gonna go back to layer 6. And we're gonna color select the black. And we're gonna just draw some circles and ellipses, edit the shapes to make his eyes. Draw his nose in. Oop. Make sure to fill those eyes in so that they don't look so creepy. Oh, and I got a little bit of a gap there. And I'm also going to put the base of the mouth. So I'm going to select this dark kind of pinkish red. Just lightly trace underneath the mouth line here. And try and create an arc. Make sure to hold it at the end so that it creates the arc. And fill this. I'm just going to change a setting really quickly for my own touch controls. Okay. Let's go back and do the tail now so that it starts to look a little more complete. Go back and select layer 4 for your tail. And we're going to make this layer alpha locked. So if you tap on the layer and select alpha lock, you're going to see that like the background for the icon of the layer gets this like gridded pattern. And what it does is it makes all transparent pixels uneditable. It's kind of a weird thing to explain, but it's very similar to clipping masks, but your colors are going to be on the same layer. So we're going to color select the lighter yellow, and you'll see that if you try and draw, it just won't let you draw outside of the black area. So I'm just going to undo those squiggles and the base of the yellow starts right here, so I'm just gonna draw that in, and then just loosely trace around the outer edge. And now that they're all connected, dragon. Oops. Right. So, I always forget this. You can't, because we drew the yellow on the same layer as the base of the tail, we can't actually drag and drop to flood fill the color, because it's going to try and apply it to everything on that layer. So, what we can do here is we can actually just increase the brush size and just hand fill it in. So I just usually make the brush the maximum size I can go and just take your time filling it in so that you don't miss any spots. And there. So now if you hide the sketch layer, you can see that it's kind of starting to come together. I'm gonna re-show it. I'm gonna create a new layer above layer 6. Make sure that you tap on it and click clipping mask. And I'm going to color select the lighter pink. I forgot to make my brush size smaller, so just make sure you adjust that to a size that's comfortable for you. And hold at the end of your brush stroke to create an ellipse and fill that. We're also going to color in the mouth here. This is actually another area where we're going to create a clipping map, or an alpha lock layer. So if you made any strokes, undo them. Go to your layers. In layer 6, we're going to tap on it and create an alpha lock. So you can have a clipping mask and an alpha lock applied to the same layer. And now this way we can just fill in the mouth here without going over the lines that we previously drew. So I'm just going to increase my brush size and fill it in. I'm going to create... Actually, we don't need to create another layer. We're going to go back to layer 8. And we're going to color select the black again. And we're gonna just adjust your brush size a little bit, so that's maybe a little bit thinner. And that's not quite thin enough. And we're gonna draw the mouth here. There. I'm gonna add some highlights to his eyes just by color selecting the white here. And just on the same layer, we're gonna quick create some ellipses. And I'm just gonna fill them in with the brush. I like to add a couple little more, so I'm gonna add just some tinier little shinies in the corners here. And we're getting pretty close now. I'm gonna go back to layer 6 And I'm gonna I don't have a color on the swatches for this, but you can select whatever color you like. We're gonna put a little bit of color into his eye, so I'm gonna make it kind of red, but if you want to make it blue just adjust these sliders till you find a color that you like. So I'm gonna go with a red, like a dark red. And we're gonna use a different brush now. So if you tap on your brush icon on the top bar, find the airbrushing category, and I like to use the big soft brush. So not the first soft brush that's in the list, but this second one down here. Click on it, make sure that your smoothing's up. I like to keep it around 50% for the airbrush. And you're going to need to adjust your brush size here. So you can see the airbrushes are usually really big. So I'm going to make it kind of smaller. The size that it shows here, by the way, in the preview is the actual size that it'll be on your screen when you draw. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller than the eye. And because we have this on an alpha lock, we don't need to worry about it going over the line. So if you're using a stylus, just use very light pressure to brush in some red. If you're using a finger, I'll undo this to show you how you can do it with a finger. Or if you just have a plain stylus that doesn't have like Bluetooth, just lower the bottom bar here for your opacity. Make it low. I would make it maybe around like 30%. And then that way, oh, I gotta turn my preferences back on. And that way, when you click with your finger, it'll come in kind of duller, so that way you can build up to it over a few strokes. So if you go into your layers and turn off the sketch, you can see that we're almost done. It looks like a Raichu now. There's a couple little things that I like to add in. We're gonna go back to layer 3, which is the base for his body. And now we're gonna select the eraser tool and make sure that you have it set to your studio pen in inking. And we're actually going to erase some lines in, so make sure your sketch is turned on. And we're going to start with the toes. So we're going to use the eraser to just help define his shapes a little more. And you'll see that when I erase in here, it's not just erasing the orange of this base layer, it erases all of the colors that are applied on the clipping masks. So this is just a little technique that I like to use for doing more graphic style artwork. So I did my bookmarks that I have for sale. I actually used pretty much this exact method to create those images. I'm gonna define his kind of, I guess, his kneecap here with a little line. His arm. Here's again where you're going to want to make sure you hold at the end of your stroke to create an arc, and just edit that shape until you get it to where you like it. And tap to exit the quick line. I like to add a little V there. I'm going to come over here to his other arm. Create another arc. You guys, if you haven't used Procreate yet and messed with the settings, your quick line tool might take longer to show up. So when you're holding at the end of your line, you might have to wait like half a second to a full second for it to actually work. Add one down here. I'm gonna do that. that's most of his lines. I'm actually going to add a couple to his tail. So go back to layer 4, and I mean, this is optional, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I like to just add a couple here where his tail is sort of overlapping a bit. Okay. And now if we hide our sketch, Raichu looks a little more defined. I'm gonna hide the color palette here, and I'm gonna double check my original image, make sure that I got everything. Okay. So, you might think this super white background probably looks really awful with this image, so to change your background color, just tap on the icon for background color in your layer list. It's going to be the very bottommost one, and then you can drag your slider around to change the background to whatever you want. In the example image, I actually used a bit of a teal. Bit of a darker teal for it. So just, you can mess around with the colors to pick whatever you want. And that's our Raichu. Yeah, teal looks really good because it's kind of the opposite of the orange. So yeah, that's Raichu. How am I for time? Okay, we're pretty good for time. I have one more image that I'm gonna show. There were, in the example images that I showed for the panel, I did have some other effects applied on the Raichu. If we have time, I'll come back to it and show you how to do those, but they're techniques that I'm going to show how to do with the next image. I do, well, I do actually do a lot with black outlining. Inking is actually my favorite thing to do, digitally and traditionally. So the next image, I'm going to show you black lines. I thought for it be kind of like a beginner image, it would be maybe a little bit easier to show it with just using basic shapes. Procreate is awesome for doing line art. There are a lot of like really cool brushes that you can download to imitate natural inking. So if you're used to using actual like brushes or pens for inking, you can find a lot of ones that can imitate those pretty well online. So, oh, I should show you how to exit. So if you want to exit this image now, you don't need to save it like you do on a computer. You just hit your gallery up in the top left, and it'll automatically save it for you. And it also automatically saves as you're drawing, so you don't need to worry about losing your progress. We're going to create a new image now. Using the plus button, we're just going to create screen size again. And I'll give you a little preview of the next image. I have this kind of anime Shiba dog that I drew because I wanted to do something a little anime inspired, but also an animal. So I'm going to walk you through some of the steps for this one, but not quite all of them. They use, honestly, most of the same techniques as the Raichu. So I'm going to go back. So go into your new canvas. We're going to hit that wrench icon in the top. You're going to add a file or a photo, so find the Shiba sketch image, not the lines. You can adjust it if you need to. I'm just going to tap the cursor because I'm going to leave it as is. Now for this one, we're actually going to leave the sketch on the bottom, but I am going to drag the opacity down, so click on the letter N, and the top slider here, just drag it down a little bit to a level that you're comfortable with. Yeah, Shibas are adorable. I was briefly thinking about a corgi, but I thought a Shiba would be fun with like other Japanese influences. So when you drag your opacity down, create a new layer. And I'm going to show you how I like to do my line art usually with the default tools. So first thing, click on your color icon in the top right. Just drag it down to black. I do use pure black for the lines. Tap your brush, and if you find the inking category, there's two that you could use. You could use ink bleed or dry ink. I prefer the look of dried ink, especially for this piece. So if you click on dried ink, make sure you tap on to go into it, and make sure that your streamline is set all the way up. You can use a stylus if you have it, but this brush actually works pretty well with using your finger. So on the left side of the screen, adjust the brush size, and I'm just going to use my finger to show you. Start tracing the image, and you'll see that it automatically tapers the end of the line. So this just helps to like make the line look more appealing. So you can actually trace these images pretty fast, just using your finger without any stylus. So I like to, if you're doing it this way, I would try and think about where you want the end of the line to taper. So like maybe here, like you want it to taper towards the outside of the little fluffs. And you can use quick lines with this as well. So like if you want to draw a circle, just hold it at the end as usual and it'll apply it, and you can edit it freely. By the way, you can do other shapes. You can do like, try straight lines and then hold it and it'll, oh no, that made a circle. You should be able to make squares. Yeah, so you can make all sorts of shapes just by holding at the end of your brush stroke. So you can kind of take your time drawing around this if you want. Now inking is usually one of the longer parts if you're doing kind of like a flat style image. So I'm only going to just do a little bit here to show you. And then we're actually going to import the liner in. So you can see that you can create pretty good liner if you just have like the basic model iPad and all you have is a finger, you don't have a stylus. You can do like full-blown pieces of artwork in Procreate very easily, and nobody's gonna know that you don't have like the pro model of iPad with like the Apple Pencil. So if you want to go ahead and line this, you can, but I'm actually going to speed this up a little bit by importing liner. So to delete layers, swipe towards the left and you'll see the delete button. I'm going to import the liner that I drew before. Don't touch anything. If you didn't transform the sketch at all, then you shouldn't need to transform the lines. But if you did, just wiggle the lines around until you get it to where you need it. We're going to make this layer a multiply layer as well to drop the white out. So clicking on the letter N and just dragging it to the top to multiply. And now this way we can color under it. I'm going to create a new layer in between layer 1 and the liner. When I do liner in an image, I actually like to fill it a little bit differently from how I did the Rysa image. So it's probably going to seem a little weird and very boring. I complain about this to my friends all the time. I like to use the selection tool. And I'll try to explain why I like to use it. So in your brushes, we're just going to go back to, actually, you know what, we can just keep the dry ink. So like, import the color swatches that I gave you. Color pick, this base white color. And now you're gonna make sure that you, and import it on the same layer. So make sure you create another new layer so that you're not drawing on the same color swatch layer. I'm just gonna drag that to the top there. So on your new layer, the way I see a lot of people doing it, I'm gonna make this color a little bit darker just so you guys can see on the screen properly. So the way I see a lot of people online doing it is they just like to kind of trace the outside edge and then fill it in after, right? But you can see the issue with doing that is you might accidentally go over the line and then you're going to be like, oh no, I gotta undo it, and then oh no, I gotta undo it again. Or you're going to do it and you're going to say, oh, I gotta go back and erase around all the outside lines. And I find this takes a lot of time and it's not a very efficient use of the tools given to you, and not an efficient time of, or an efficient use of your time. So I actually like to use the selection tool to fill my base colors. So I'm just going to go back, I'm going to make sure I have this base coat selected. Your selection tool is this S-shaped icon on the top bar. You'll see it highlighted in blue here. So if you click on that, make sure freehand is selected in blue. It should be by default. And now the way this works, I'll just show you very quickly to the side. You can draw and you're going to see this dotted line come up, and you can lift your pen, you don't need to, or your finger, you don't need to like keep it down. You can actually tap to create straight lines, and or you can just like, you know, curl in. You're not going to be able to do quick lines, but that's okay. So you're not going to get your undo icons here, so you have to use 2 fingers to untap. So like double tap to undo any selections. When you want to close a selection loop, so let's say you select a circle, this gray dot where you started drawing, just tap on that, and that's going to create a selection. So now what a selection does is if you use your brush tool, you're not going to be able to go outside of that selection. And when you want to just clear the selection, just tap the selection icon again. So I'm going to go back into it, and I'm going to start outlining the image with the selection tool. So you can be a little bit messy with it. I would recommend zooming in a lot so that you can get right in the middle of the lines. And we're just going to trace the whole outer edge. And if you mess up a section, just remember to 2-finger tap to undo it. And this might seem like you're not really getting anything done at first, but when you're finally done the selection, you're just going to be able to use the fill tool to drop all of it in. Yeah, the dried ink brush is awesome for it looking like a kind of like a crayon, or like really like a really messy brush. It's really good for like just giving some textural difference into your image. The other brush that I pointed out, it's like 2 brushes above it, dry ink or something like that. That one's also really good. It's just a little bit like kind of even more messy and a little bit paler. But they're both very good brushes to use for inking, just for a more variated look. You could also use the studio pen to do your liner if you don't really like the messy look. I would use the studio pen on maximum smoothness. So just keeping zoomed in on the black lines and tracing all around it. We'll get back to the beginning eventually, don't worry. if you are using an Apple Pencil or another Bluetooth stylus, this would be a great time to charge it. I'm really bad for forgetting to charge my pen before I start drawing. So when I'm doing my selections, I actually will often do the selections with my fingers and let my pen charge while I'm doing that. For simpler images, it won't take too long, but for my normal artwork that I like to do a lot of lines, like really complex line art. So it can take a long time, so I'll usually let my stylus charge while I'm doing that. Make sure that you don't, if you need to zoom out, just to make sure that you don't go inside the image. And then just zoom back in to start lining again. Yeah, David, you're probably not used to me using Studio Pen or the dry ink. I have a couple of inking brushes that I downloaded and that I bought that I really like to use more than the built-in brushes. So normally when I'm streaming I use those, but for a beginner's tutorial I thought it would be better to use the built-in brushes, and some of them are really nice. I use the airbrush tool all the time. The airbrush tool is like probably the most used tool in Procreate for me for all of my artwork. I use it for fills, I use it for smudging, I use it for erasing, shading, and lighting. I use it all the time. There's some other really good, oops, what did I do here? There's some other really good natural media imitations. So if you like the look of gouache or watercolor, there are some built-in tools for that. So when you finally get to the end and you see the gray dot, click on it, and now you're going to see that the whole doggo is selected. Now we're going to click on our color in the top right and drag it out and just drop it. And it's all colored. It might seem like it takes a while, but when you get used to it, you can select your image really fast, and I find it saves time compared to trying to outline the whole image with a brush. And you'll see me using the selection tool for filling in other colors on this image too. So we're gonna create a new layer above the base. Make sure that it's a clipping mask. We're gonna go into our brushes, airbrushing category, and select the soft airbrush again. Now we're gonna color pick this orange. Shibas come in a lot of colors, so if you don't want to use this orange, you can go in and adjust it to whatever color you want. I'm actually a big fan of the really dark brown to like black Shiba Inus. I think they're super cool looking. But for this one, I'm gonna use the orange. So we're gonna adjust the size of it here to make it pretty large. I'm setting mine to about 12%. If you have a stylus, it's okay to keep it at maximum opacity. If you're using like just a normal stylus or your fingers, you can, I would have it down to maybe 20 to 30% opacity. But where I'm using the stylus for this, I'm just gonna keep it at max. And now we're gonna lightly brush in the color. So I had I just use the kind of like default, calling out my reference image here that I use. You can see that I just kind of use the classic Shiba colors, classic markings. So we're gonna just kind of, with light pressure, I'm gonna start airbrushing in some of these areas. You might need to adjust your brush size as you go. So for the face, I'm actually gonna adjust it a little bit smaller so that I can airbrush in the bridge of the nose and the edge of the face here, and just solid fill in the rest of it. Don't worry about like the ears and stuff, we're gonna erase that after. And you can also, like, when we do the back here, select it, making the brush a bit bigger. Don't worry about going over where the bandana and stuff is, that's okay, because we're gonna color over it after. So just slightly airbrush these in to where you want the markings. I'm just going to use the eraser tool, increase the size so that I can just erase here where I overlapped, and on the foot here. Go back to my brush tool. I'm gonna do his hips here. And decrease the brush size a little bit, and so I can make it a little more defined right here. Add a little bit to his front leg. His shoulder. We'll come up here and just get all that filled in solidly. I'm going to increase my brush size a tiny bit. Really, with using light pressure to get these gradients, or if you have just a normal stylus or your fingers, just slowly build up to them using the low opacity. And I think this is good for his markings. Okay. We're going to create a new layer above it. Make sure it's a clipping mask. And we're going to fill in probably the facial details now and the paw pads. So I'm going to click the little square button to invoke the eyedropper to select this black. I'm gonna, and you can just keep your airbrush on if you want for these. Just make it like a smaller size, and I'm just gonna fill in the nose. And I'm gonna zoom out and zoom in on the paw pads here to fill these in. Like I said, you're not limited to the colors that I picked. You can make these whatever colors you want. I think it would actually be kind of cool to see different variations of it. Okay. I'm going to select the base white again from the color palette, and I'm just going to color here where the eye shinies are, his little eyebrows. And, oops, that's a little too big. Made my brush a little bit bigger here, and I'm gonna just fill in on the same layer, I'm gonna do the green for his little bandana thing. And I'm not going to color in with the airbrush here because it's a bit of a larger area. I'm actually going to use my selection tool again. And I'm going to select all around them bandana. And then I'm just going to drag and drop the color into it. Just exit out of the selection by tapping on the icon. I'm going to select the deeper red. I'm going to go back into the selection tool. We're doing this all on the same layer, by the way. We don't need to, for something like this, we don't really need to bother about making sure it's on separate layers, because where it's a bit more of a simpler image. And I'm just, here I'm just selecting all around the wrap for the sword. And if you really don't like using selections, that's totally okay. You can just use your pen to go around it. Pretty much. I'm surprised there hasn't been more, honestly. And you can use your fill to do it, or you can actually just even use your brush and just make your brush size bigger and fill it in one go. I'm going to exit out of the selection, and then I'm going to go select the black color. I'm going to go back into my selection tool. And I'm just going to make the rest of the sword this slightly off black color. You can actually have multiple selections on the go at the same time. So when you end this selection or whatever, you can actually just start tapping in another area to start a new one, and they'll both stay. Like this, and then I'm going to use a large brush to quickly swipe on the color. Exit out of the selection tool. And here's most of our flat colors for the Shiba. So the next step, I think, we can do a couple things. I'm going to show you how to copy and paste elements. So we're going to select the off-white color, and on a new layer, we're going to go back to our brushes, find the studio pen, make sure, just do a couple little squiggle lines to make sure that it's a size that you like. I'm okay with the size that it's at now, so I'm not going to adjust it. And we're going to quickly create a sort of traditional Japanese fabric pattern with just swirls. So anywhere on this new layer, just kind of create some little swirled patterns like this. They don't need to be super precise, just kind of however you want them to be for this. And when you get a few, maybe like this many, you can do 3 or 4, it doesn't matter. We're gonna take our selection tool again. We're just gonna make a big loop around it. Okay, and when you have the selection confirmed, I don't know how well you can see it on my screen, but you will know when your selection is active because you're gonna get these like diagonal gray lines appearing around it. So when you get this, you're gonna use 3 fingers and very quickly tap and swipe down, and you'll see it'll bring up this little menu with all your cut, copy, paste options. We're not gonna copy and paste, we're just gonna copy for now. So tap copy. And now if you use the same like 3 finger, quickly tap and swipe down, we're gonna invoke that again and hit paste. You'll see it brings up like this transformation box, like when you import an image. If you tap like in the center of it, you can drag it this way. And we're just gonna paste a bunch of these and kind of rotate them around and move them to some different areas. Hit the cursor when you have it transformed. Don't worry about it going over the bandana yet, we're just gonna erase them after. So 3 finger, tap, swipe down, paste, and just kind of rotate them around different ways. Try and fill in most of the areas of it. I'm gonna leave it like this. So now that you have it all there, we're gonna use the selection tool again, and we're gonna outline the bandana. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's something else we need to do before we start to select the bandana. So exit out of the selection. When you paste elements back into Procreate, they're always created on a new layer. So you'll see you have a bunch of inserted images layers. We're gonna merge them down. So there's 2 ways you can do it. You can tap, and this second item from the bottom, merge down. Click on that, and it's just gonna collapse your layer into the one beneath it. So you can do it that way, or if you're just on the screen, you can use single finger, tap and hold. And if you drag your finger down, oh, you can't really see it right now. You can tap anywhere on the screen for this. So if you tap hold, you can drag down and it'll allow you to merge the layer down. I prefer to look at my layers to make sure that I don't accidentally merge layers I don't mean to. Okay, so now that they're all on the same layer, you can use your eraser if you want, but on the face, there could be elements overlapping that we don't see. So I just like to use the selection tool again to select all around the bandana. Make sure you go around the edge of the sword here. And this part you don't need to worry about. And then just carefully select the face here. And now in the bottom menu thing that you have here, the 3rd option is to invert, so we're going to press that. We're going to take our eraser, make it the biggest size. And then this way we don't have to worry about accidentally erasing parts we don't want to. We can get any of the hidden spots that we might not see that are kind of against the face here. And then just deselect, and now we have a cute little pattern on the scarf. I use copy and paste a lot for doing repeating patterns on clothes. It helps to speed things up a lot, and then you can, online you can download textures to overlay onto clothing items, and I see a lot of people do that, and it is faster, but I find it doesn't always look as natural. If you have if you just draw a single element and then paste it yourself, I find it'll usually look better than just having one flat image. I just gotta open the blinds here a little bit. Okay. So at this point, we're gonna add a little bit of color to the background. So, tapping on your background color, I made mine a bit of a beige color, so you can kind of mess around with what you want to do for that. You don't need to use the same color as me. This is the one I went with. I'm going to select this second red here, and going back to my airbrush, my soft brush, I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller. Create a new layer underneath layer 4, and we're gonna draw a circle, hold it to make sure, and you can edit the shape and make sure that you just click the circle option instead of the ellipse. Now with the circle, you don't want to click on the blue dots because it's going to make it an ellipse again. What you want to do is in circle mode, you actually just click outside of the dots, so just in between, and then you can adjust your circle size that way. So just adjust it to however you want. If you want a circle in the background, it's fine if you don't. And we're gonna fill it. So now here you're gonna see where I was, in the Rysa image, I was talking about these white lines that might appear. You're gonna get this with softer brushes. So when you drag and drop, you're gonna want to keep holding your finger there until you see this slider at the top that says color drop threshold, and just drag it to the right until you hit this, and then just drag your finger a little bit back to the left just so that it's not filling the whole layer, and then let go, and it'll have it all filled. I'm going to show you how to apply some textures now. I'm going to hide the color swatches because I'm done with that. Oh, and here I can see some spots that I missed with the white, so I'm just going to go back in with the eraser to get those. There we go. I'm also going to hide the sketch layer because I can still see it a bit there. Okay. So we're going to start with the paper texture. I like to do this just to kind of give it a bit more variety, make it look a little more natural rather than just purely digital. So I included a texture image for you, which is the Shiba paper text. So drop it in, and I would just leave it fill in the whole thing. Click the cursor at the top to exit out of it. In our I'm having a brain fart here. In here, we're gonna change the type of the layer. So, because right now it's just covering everything. So if you click the letter N and drag it up to multiply, you'll see that you can see your colors from underneath it, and it still has this kind of watercolor paper look to it. So I just like to use this on like some of my more like sketches, like if I'm doing digital sketches and stuff like that, or if I just want to do like minimal shading, like in this image, I like to bring this in. I'm actually going to bring in another texture to help add more variety to the fur. So we're going to import again, the Shiba WC text file, select that. You don't need to move it, you can just hit that cursor icon. We're going to make this layer a clipping mask, so make sure that the pattern layer you created is also a clipping mask. And now you can see this texture is confined to the dog. And this one, you can experiment with what you want. You can use soft light if you like. If you scroll down, you should see soft light. You can see these all do like kind of wacky effects. For this one, I think I actually used I did use soft light for it. I think soft light looks the best, but you can use whatever one you think looks cool. And you can adjust the opacity if you don't really like how strongly it appears. So I'm just going to drag it down a tiny bit to maybe around 80%. And yeah, there's some texture. The last thing for this image is to add some shadows. I add shadows mostly in the same way that I color, so I'll go over it pretty quick. I still got some time. So underneath the texture layer, I'm gonna create a new layer, make sure it's gonna automatically be a clipping mask. I like to use a dark purple. For this you can use any color, any dark color really at first. Make sure you're on the soft brush. And for simple images, I like to I'm gonna shade the, like the areas that are further away. So the legs that are kind of behind, I'm gonna select those. Just going around all of these. I do most of my shadows on the same layer. You can separate them if you want, or if you want to have multiple colors of shadows. On more fully developed images, I usually use multiple shadow layers. Oops. But for this one, we're just going to use one. So I'm just filling in the whole leg. And after deselecting, I'm going to go back to the front leg and just swoop around that. Fill it in with the airbrush again. And now I'm just going to pick out some smaller areas just to help make the image pop a little bit more. So I'm going to decrease the size of my soft brush. In the example image, I had a little bit here by the base of the tail. I'm just going to erase the excess here. This is probably going to look really ugly at first, but don't worry, we're going to edit it afterwards. I'm going to add a bit of shadow to the ear here, and a little bit here. And using small brush, I'm just going to trace around the bottom of his face on the scarf. His paw as well, where it's kind of turned in, I'm going to add some shadows here. You can add more shadows if you want, so like maybe you want to add some shadows like to the sword hilt and stuff, you can do that. But for this, I'm going to kind of leave it like this. And now we're going to use another color, or another layer style. So clicking on the little end there to bring up your layer styles. I like to use linear burn. You can use multiply if you want. Multiply is pretty common, but for this I use linear burn. Excuse me. And now we're going to edit the colors via a modifier. So next to the wrench tool, there's like a little magic wand thing, and it brings up a list of adjustments. We're going to select hue, saturation, and brightness towards the bottom. And usually I start out with the brightness. So I usually just kind of drag this up until I think it's like just dark enough. And then I'm going to leave the saturation about the same. You can bring it up if you want it to be stronger. And then you can use the hue sliders to change the shadows to like whatever color you want. I usually stick to like a purpley blue or a purpley pink. So for this one I'm going to kind of go over to here. And when you get the adjustments to how you like using these sliders at the bottom, you just click the adjustments button again to exit out of it. And there we have some simple shadows. You can do the same thing to add a bit of a shadow underneath the dog. So just using the airbrush, just like to quickly scribble in shadow. I'm gonna set this one to multiply, and I'm gonna drag the opacity down until I think it looks good. So I'm probably going to leave it at about this, I think. And I think that's everything for the Shiba. Oh, so another little effect that I like to do when I'm doing line art like this and like in maybe more of like a chibi image or like a simpler image where I don't want to do a ton of shading is just to make the line art pop a little bit more. I like to duplicate it. So on your line art layer should be the topmost. If you swipe left, you'll see duplicate. Hit that. We're going to bring this down. I actually just realized this might not work with JPEG images, but we'll see if this will work. We're going to drag it to the very bottom, and we're going to use adjustments, Gaussian blur. So when you're using Gaussian blur, you can see it, if you just like move your finger left and right, you can see that it's actually blurring the liner that we duplicated underneath. So I'm going to put the Gaussian blur on probably about 5%. I'm going to exit out of this, and then normally I like to make it white. No, that's not gonna work. So normally I like to do this with a white brush to contrast more with the black, but I actually see a lot of people doing this for when they're trying to do like fake anime screenshots. It gives it kind of more of a traditional feel, because if you look at like old anime screenshots or like old cartoons and stuff, you'll often see like a little bit of a blur around the line art. So that's a little trick that I like to do. I usually, like I said, I usually like to use white, but because of the way the image is saved for the tutorial, we can't change it. But the black will give it a little bit more of a traditional feel. So that's it for the Shiba. I think there's about 15 minutes left, so if you guys have any questions, you can ask away. I'm gonna go back to the Raichu while waiting to see if anybody has any comments or concerns. And I'm gonna kind of show you how I did some color overlay that I used to cheat a little more variety into my images. So going back to the Raichu. I'm gonna create a layer on top. And this is gonna look kind of gaudy at first, but trust me, it'll be okay. I need to call it the image that I did now. I'm gonna select like a super red color, and using my airbrush on like a larger setting, I'm gonna blob this into this corner. I like to select purple. Now I'm gonna go over to yellow into this corner. I know you're probably thinking like, what am I doing? Procreate is only for Apple. It's on the iPad and the iPhone. Unfortunately, I don't know if they're ever gonna move to Android platforms. But there are lots of good free software. Like most of the stuff that I'm doing in Procreate, you can do in other software as well. The only thing that you can't do is those quick lines, like where we've created arcs to create the shapes. You can accomplish that in other ways in software, but it's not as intuitive. But like all the layer styles that I've been using, the airbrush, all that stuff is mostly the same in other software. And what do I use? I think I used a bright sunlight over here. So when I get these like super bright, kind of ugly colors on the go, I like to go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I just kind of max it out. And then I mess around with the layer styles, so you can see that like it just helps to add a bit of a color gradient, like if you mess with the opacity and the layer style. And it just helps to add like a little bit more of a visual variety to it. So yeah. And if you wanted to add like highlighting to the Raichu, or shadows, you could do it in the same way that I did the Shiba, where just using the airbrush and the selection tool. Yeah, it's too bad about other software not really having those quick line actions. They're useful to be honest. When I'm doing my normal line art, I don't actually use the quick lines very much. I only really use those when I'm doing like a very heavy graphic style. So like a lot of my merchandise, I used it just to get those ultra clean kind of, you know, like that very much like graphic arts style. When I'm doing my actual liner, I don't use the quick lines, and I actually don't really keep my pen smoothing up very high. But that's just because I'm very much used to doing line art. I've been kind of working at it for years. I use like an actual brush with ink in traditional media a lot of times too, so it's just a personal preference for me. I like to get a lot of texture into my line art, so I usually I like to just use the basic pen with no smoothing and none of the quick lines for that stuff. But if you do want to do graphic style artwork, you can definitely do it in other software using options called snapping or vector lines. They're just a little bit harder to set up, and the other software just tends to not be as intuitive, unfortunately. But yeah, that's this is, I feel like, a pretty good coverage of the basics of Procreate. They're the tools that I use most frequently in creating art, and it's the basis of kind of drawing anything. I feel like it's a good foundation. Not a lot of people know about clipping masks or alpha locks, and I feel like those are two really important tools to know how to use when you're doing digital artwork, because they can save you a lot of frustrations, especially if you're new or if you're doing client work. And if you're drawing something for a client and they say, I like this, but I want like the hat to be a different color or a different size, you'll be able to do it a lot faster if you have everything on the proper kinds of layers. But yeah, thank you for watching. You can ask me questions about Procreate or even any other digital software anytime, like on my Facebook page. Just message me. I know I've been doing digital art for like 15 years now, so I'm familiar with Photoshop, Fire Alpaca, Medibang Paint. Most software are like, they're all kind of similar, so if you have questions about like anything, you could just ask me and I could probably help you out with it. But yeah, I think we're about like 10 minutes now from the end, so I think there's another panel happening after, so you guys should go check that out. I think it's the horror movies, so you're welcome. You're welcome, my moderator, and thank you for moderating for me. But anyways, I'm gonna stop the stream now, so thank you for watching. Bye.